Now, a couple days ago, I saw an article online that asked the question, or suggested the theory, that what if Darth Maul returned for Season 2 of The Mandalorian, which, of course, both made me laugh and, sadly, click on the article because I was curious to see if this person was either ignorant about Maul's fate, or if they were about to propose some crazy theory about how he could come back again. Because, as a lot of you know, during the time period of The Mandalorian, Maul is very much dead and I'd argue should absolutely stay that way. Yes, he came back in the Clone Wars animated series, and it was both handled well and turned out to be one of the many great stories that show gave us. He then showed up again later on in Rebels and had a fantastic story arc with Ezra, but ultimately met his fate once more at the hands of Obi-Wan Kenobi, in what was easily one of the best episodes of the entire series, not to mention was a very, very fitting end for his character just in general. Anyway, this article basically went over Maul's connection to the Darksaber and ends up sort of lamenting the fact that he was killed in Rebels and that, barring a Palpatine-style comeback, is dead and gone when he would have made a great villain for Season 2 of The Mandalorian. The article then goes on to say that even though he's highly unlikely to show up in The Mandalorian, other than perhaps in a flashback, there are rumors floating around right now that he's getting his own Disney Plus show, or they even suggested that they, meaning Lucasfilm, could retcon Rebels and have him show up in the upcoming Obi-Wan series, and that they could redo his ending. And though I'd absolutely be against them putting Maul in the Obi-Wan series, because again, Rebels really gave him a beautiful ending, I initially thought I wouldn't be against him getting his own series, and as I've speculated before, I do think his cameo in the movie Solo wasn't just blatant fan service. I think they likely had future plans for the character, maybe to have him be a part of a sequel to Solo, or to put him into some sort of spin-off of that movie, so I could see those plans being modified and him being part of some sort of Disney Plus series now. But then the article mentioned that there are rumors that Darth Vader is getting his own show or series or a standalone movie, and though like pretty much all Star Wars fans, I do love Darth Vader, and in theory, I don't think I could ever get enough of him, and these are just rumors, so who knows if there's any truth to them, it really made me realize that in a franchise that is in so many ways defined by its numerous legendary, iconic villains, the Disney era of Star Wars has yet to give us a single good original villain anywhere, and all they've essentially done is recycled old villains, and for some reason, that seems to be all they still want to do. And when I say recycled villains, I mean that both on the individual level and in the broad sense, because the First Order in the new trilogy is nothing but a clone of the Empire. There wasn't anything original or unique about them. The Force Awakens may introduce us to Snoke and the Knights of Ren, but nothing ever really becomes of either one of them. Snoke right away was a lot like the Emperor before him, and I guess turns out kinda was the Emperor, and though there was still a chance to do something different with him after The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi of course simply kills him off before that could ever be realized. Then in The Rise of Skywalker, we learn he was merely a puppet of Palpatine's the whole time anyway. In the case of the Knights of Ren, they're seen briefly in a flashback in The Force Awakens, and they seem like a real cool and interesting idea. Then they're not even used in The Last Jedi, before they just kinda are there in The Rise of Skywalker, simply because JJ probably felt some sort of obligation to actually do something with them finally. Then there's General Hux and Captain Phasma, the latter of which I'll only say was an attempt by Disney to make another Boba Fett type character that failed miserably. When it comes to Hux, I thought there was a lot of potential for him after The Force Awakens, but then he's just turned into a joke in The Last Jedi, and in The Rise of Skywalker he becomes a mole for the Resistance simply because he doesn't want Kylo Ren to win. Then he dies and no one really cares one way or the other about him. And then, maybe the ultimate sign of their failure on the villain front is that they bring back Palpatine with no sort of explanation or setup because they created nothing for themselves to use in the final movie. They'd painted themselves into a corner and he was literally the only option, save going with maybe Plagueis, who would have taken some level of explanation that they just didn't have time for. And the irony is the only reason why Palpatine's return in The Rise of Skywalker works at all, why a lot of people just accept it and even enjoy it, is because of how great of a villain he was in the previous movies, especially the prequels. And so the sad part about the sequel trilogy is its utter lack of originality on all fronts. Pretty much everything is recycled in one respect or another, and the story ends no differently than the way it ended previously. And instead of adding to the Star Wars mythology and to the Skywalker saga, it ends up mostly just being an unnecessary part of it. And I'd argue that's all primarily because there's no new interesting threat in this trilogy that goes beyond or is any different than what we've seen before. In the end, it simply becomes Palpatine is back and wants to rule the galaxy, and his evil plan needs to be stopped, and his weapon, or in this case weapons, need to be destroyed before they can be deployed, which is the exact same plot as Return of the Jedi. And sure, it may look bigger or grander this time around because there's just more ships and more of anything, which is J.J. Abrams' style, but the stakes are exactly the same as last time. And even if Palpatine did win in the end, who's to say yet another rebellion doesn't form to eventually stop him again? I mean, didn't The Last Jedi tell us that darkness rises and light to meet it? So if Rey fails, isn't it just a matter of time before the light side rises again to overthrow Palpatine? And sure, it seems like maybe his victory could be more permanent this time, thanks to the Star Destroyers with their little mini Death Star weapons. But all the Sith fleet does is make you wonder what was the point of the First Order and Starkiller Base, and what was the point of the first two movies of the trilogy that set them up? If Palpatine controlled Snoke and Snoke controlled the First Order, why did the First Order dump all their resources into Starkiller Base when they also could have been making Star Destroyers with Death Star tech? And what was the point of the dreadnoughts we saw in The Last Jedi that didn't have the same level of firepower as these other Star Destroyers in the Sith fleet? And why did the First Order attack the New Republic when they did? Why'd they attack them roughly a year before the Sith fleet was ready to deploy? A Sith fleet that would have no doubt been well into production at that time. I mean, if you still wanted to make Starkiller Base, that would have been one thing, but why not hold off on firing it for the first time and destroying the Hosnian system until after the Sith fleet was ready to deploy? Then, on the very same day, you take out the Hosnian system from afar with Starkiller Base, and then you park a Star Destroyer that can blow up a planet in pretty much every other major system. I don't know, that pretty much sounds like checkmate to me. And you might try to counter by saying that the First Order didn't know about the Sith fleet, but Snoke sure as hell should have if he was Palpatine or being controlled by him, and he was of course very much alive when Starkiller Base destroyed the Hosnian system. And don't even get me started about the fact that Palpatine announces his return to the galaxy days in advance and gives the Resistance a chance to do something about it, when he could have and should have just stayed silent, deployed the Sith fleet across the galaxy, and then said, "Surprise bitches, I'm back," before anyone had the chance to try and stop him. Also, at the end of The Rise of Skywalker, only the Sith fleet is destroyed, but what about the First Order? Again, what about that regime they tried to sell us on in the first two movies? Aren't they essentially still in the exact same position they were in when Episode 9 started? Aren't they entrenched throughout the galaxy still? As far as I know, they suffer virtually no losses in this movie, other than to their command structure, I suppose. Which I guess means we should just assume that with the head of the snake cut off, the galaxy that is now united will make short work of them. But if they were that easy to basically overrun, if such a massive allied fleet could be assembled in a matter of hours, literally, why did a galaxy that was still recovering from the scars of the Empire not immediately rise up and band together to fight back against the First Order? Why did everyone just roll over to them in a matter of days? And look, the real issue or problem with having terrible villains is that your heroes can only be as impressive as the bad guys they overcome. One of the things that makes Luke Skywalker such a great character in the original trilogy is that he essentially defeats Darth Vader by saving him and redeeming him. And for the first two movies of the trilogy, we would have never believed there's any chance Luke could defeat him on any level, especially after the first time they meet in The Empire Strikes Back, and Luke, to put it bluntly, just gets his ass kicked by Vader. We clearly get the impression that Darth Vader is the worst, most evil being in the galaxy, and that he's very powerful. Not to mention, he's simply terrifying on top of all that. And though some people will want to make the argument that Kylo Ren is a good villain in the sequel trilogy, and though I think a case could be made that he's at least an interesting character, his constant failure and being forever conflicted makes him a weak villain. Certainly too weak to drive or carry the story, or to be a measuring stick for our heroes to be compared against. Hence why another real villain had to be brought in for Episode 9 after Snoke was killed in 8, because no one would have taken Kylo Ren seriously if he'd been quote-unquote promoted to the spot of main villain of the story. And this problem with Kylo Ren translates to a problem with Rey as well. Her basically being able to best Kylo Ren in the first two movies makes both of them less interesting characters and damages the overall story. Again, your hero can only be as impressive or interesting as the great villain they have to overcome. And if they start out more impressive than the villain, what's the point of the story unless the hero ultimately falls and becomes the villain? Which is really the route Episode 9 should have gone. Make Rey fall to the dark side and have the conflicted Kylo Ren come back to the light permanently to try and stop her, even though he's failed to defeat her before. And as I've said in other videos, this then goes a long way in silencing many of the complaints about Rey being too powerful, since now that power will make her a difficult villain for the weaker Kylo Ren to overcome. This approach also makes the name Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, make a hell of a lot more sense. Furthermore, this could have even been done without necessarily having to bring back Palpatine, and the focus of the overall story could have been kept on the Resistance needing to stop and destroy the First Order, not needing to stop some brand new threat while ignoring the old one 2 movies had set up. There also wouldn't have been a need for such a crazy pace to the film. No need to cram in there all this information we needed about the return of Palpatine and this new fleet. In closing here, I'll just ask you this. Which of the following groups sounds the least impressive to you? Is it Darth Vader, Tarkin, Boba Fett, Jabba the Hutt, and the Emperor? Or is it Darth Maul, Sidious, Dooku, Jango Fett, and General Grievous? Or is it maybe Kylo Ren, General Hux, Captain Phasma, Snoke, the Knights of Ren, and Resurrected Palpatine? And just imagine how weak that last group would be if we removed Resurrected Palpatine. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Is the greatest flaw of the sequel trilogy its inability to create a truly great and unique villain and a unique threat to the galaxy? Do you think there was a better way to do Episode 9 that didn't include bringing Palpatine back? Whatever you think, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.